Good day, welcome to another segment of my YouTube channel. Please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Today is an educational video. It's about mental illness. Mental illness is real. Some of us may deny it, but it exists. And I believe it will impact all of us. I mean, when I mean all of us, I mean each family somehow I believe will be impacted by mental illness. And sometimes we are ashamed of mental illness because of the stigma and the label that society has associated with mental illness. But it doesn't have to be so. And so this video is really to educate you and also to educate myself about mental illness. So it's my pleasure to have on my YouTube today is Dr. Alicia Malcolm.
Hello.
Welcome to my YouTube channel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Now tell us about yourself, who you are, where do you work, before we start our interview.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. So, as you said, my name is Dr. Alicia Malcolm. I am the director of the Department of Mental Health and Substance Dependence. I'm also a practicing clinical psychologist. All right, so I also recently started a private practice. My company is called Understanding Minds, TCI, and what that's basically about is providing psychological testing and counseling services. So those are the things that keep me busy.
That's enough. That's enough. That's more than enough to keep you busy.
Yeah.
Dr. Malcolm, what is mental illness? What is your definition of mental illness?
All right, so a mental illness, and you may hear me use the word mental disorder, okay?
Mental disorder.
All right, but people tend to use the terms interchangeably because it pretty much means the same thing, all right? But a mental illness or a mental disorder is basically a condition that affects a person's mood, their thinking, as well as their behavior. And it also impacts on their ability to function, how well they're able to function on a daily basis. So in essence, that's what a mental disorder is. It's something that impacts your mood, your thinking, and your behavior. And it makes it difficult for you to function on a daily basis. So for instance, a mental illness or a mental disorder that impacts a person's mood, you may see where they have challenges with experiencing like intense sadness, or they may have intense irritability or anger issues, things like that. So if it's with their mood, all right? If it's in the area of their thinking, and this is just an example, they may have delusional thoughts, okay? So they may be delusional, where, and a delusion is basically, you know, if you have like a strongly held belief that whether or not you are presented with information to the contrary, you still hold on to that belief, you know, regardless of what you were told. So for example, and this might be extreme, but somebody who believes that they're Joan of Arc, or somebody who believes that they are, that the Queen of England is in love with them. That's an example of a delusional, you know, idea. So also if, for instance, the illness is in the area of your behavior, you may manifest behaviors where, for instance, you are excessively washing your hands. So that's like an example with a person who may be suffering from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or they may have behavior where they're drinking excessively or using drugs excessively. All right, so mental illnesses touch on those broad areas: mood, thinking, and behavior. And there are quite a number of mental disorders. There's over 200, and I think it's like 297 different
Really?
mental disorders, yes. And they're all listed out in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is what psychiatrists and psychologists use when they're going to diagnose somebody with a mental illness. All right, so, and when we do that diagnosis, basically to meet criteria for mental disorder, basically what we're doing is we're conducting, for instance, an interview, like how you're doing now. We're conducting an interview, but we call it a structured clinical interview, where we're talking to the person, asking them questions, we're observing their behavior. We may do administer a number of psychometric tests or assessments. We may also speak with relatives that the person knows, friends to the person, to collect collaborative information, and then we put all that information together. We score whatever assessments we administered, we interpret the results, and then we arrive at a diagnosis. Like
Wow,
that.
that's very interesting. And I know
Yeah.
you mentioned that there are close to 300
Right.
different types of mental disorders.
Yeah.
What are some of the top causes of mental disorders? What cause people to
Yeah.
experience mental illness?
All right, so there isn't one particular cause because as we discussed just now, there are so many different
Right.
disorders. So what has been evident in research is that there are a number of factors that contribute to mental disorders, and that would include biological factors, psychological factors, and also environmental factors. So for example, when it comes to biological factors, we're looking at things like abnormalities in the way certain nerve cells in the brain function. So if there are abnormalities there, that can be linked to a mental disorder. Infections can also be linked to the development of mental disorders. For example, you have certain types of bacteria like streptococcus that's linked to OCD in children, all right? Or prenatal damage, for example, if a child, if there's trauma during delivery, or if a baby is deprived of oxygen getting to their brain, stuff like that, those things are linked to mental disorders. So you have things like that. Substance use as well. Long-term substance use is also linked to mental disorders like anxiety and depression. All right, so there are various links. And then, for example, psychological factors. You're looking at things like the early loss of a parent. That can lead to a mental illness, or neglect, a traumatic incident, things like abuse, be it sexual or verbal or emotional. Those types of psychological factors can lead to a mental disorder. All right, and when we're looking at environmental factors now, you're looking at things like death or divorce, or social or cultural expectations, like this idea that you have to be thin in order to be beautiful. That can be linked to disorders like eating disorders. All right.
So it forces you to behave a certain way.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
All right, so those are the various factors, the various broad factors that can contribute to a mental illness.
Do you think, based on what you're saying, do you think mental illness then is hereditary? Can it be passed down from one parent to the next?
Definitely. When you consider the biological factors, there are genes, a number of genes that, if there are abnormalities in those genes, let's say, for instance, a person has a relative in their family with a mental disorder, first degree relative, a parent, sibling, they are more at risk. It isn't saying that they may develop it for sure, but they are likely to be more at risk of developing a mental disorder than somebody else who doesn't have a close relatives with the disorder. And so what has been found is that mental illnesses, the susceptibility of a mental illness can be carried in genes. So if those genes are transferred to someone, it can make them more susceptible to developing a mental disorder. And what likely happens, or what tends to happen, is that those susceptible genes interact with something in the environment, like it'll interact with a major stressor, like a traumatic event or abuse or substance use. It'll interact with something like that, and that'll trigger the mental illness.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, the Word of God says, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, love, and sound mind. He's given us a sound mind. So how do you, as a psychologist, clinical psychologist, tell us, or tell me, who are, we are Christians, you're saying, I have a sound mind. How can I have mental disorders?
Yeah. Well, here's my take on it. Generally, I believe, based on my understanding of the Bible, I don't believe that it's God's will for any of us to be sick or to suffer with any kinds of diseases, be it in our physical body or be it in the area of our mind and our emotions, So I would, tell such a person who may be struggling with a mental health issue, if they do believe in God, then don't be reluctant in also taking that to Him and praying about that as well, because I don't think it's His will for anyone to be sick,
Yeah.
regardless of what form or nature the sickness comes in.
You're absolutely right.
You know?
I don't believe it's His will either. Now, we did, I did 2 videos, YouTube on, Reverend Malcolm and Pastor Dean,
Right.
who were addicted to drugs, and they didn't go to rehab.
Yeah.
They just surrendered to God, and they were delivered. Are you aware of any cases where people were delivered from mental illness without going through any treatment, like how Reverend Malcolm and Reverend Dean were delivered
Yeah.
from drugs?
I do know of people who have been healed of a mental disorder or a substance use disorder. They didn't use any medication. They didn't get any counseling or anything like that. It was pretty much a miracle. It was something supernatural that happened for them, and I think that is great. I think I'm happy for them, that happened. At the same time, that doesn't happen for everyone, And what my encouragement would be, because sometimes God will take you the route of the doctor. He may use that as the avenue.
Sure.
So for some persons, they may need to go to a program, a rehab program, or they may need to sit with a mental health professional, and receive some therapy, or they may even need to use medication. So but there are cases that I've learned of where persons have been healed or delivered, as you would say, from a mental disorder.
You mentioned medication. Most times when we think of mental disorders, we think of persons who saying that they have to be on medication in order to appear to be normal, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is that something common? Is that a common solution or recommendation that is being done? Will you give persons the medication? Is medication effective?
Okay, not in every case. Not every case is going to require medication. So there are certain mental illnesses or mental disorders where medication is required, and it is one of the main forms of treatment. Sometimes it may be in combination with psychotherapy, all right, but it's also a standard form for some illnesses. And there are certain illnesses, mental illnesses, that are chronic, just like we would have certain other physical ailments like cancer and diabetes and heart disease that are chronic, and you have to kind of stay on the medication in order to, be able to manage the condition. It's the same thing with certain mental health disorders. There are persons who have to be on medication in order to help treat and help manage that illness so that they are able to function a bit better and do what they need to do.
So someone that is mentally disordered, that's the word you use,
Yeah, you can say mentally
Yeah.
disordered, yeah.
Can they live a normal life? Can they still maintain a normal life? Or do we know, is it obvious that someone is suffering from mental? I guess it depends.
Well, yeah, it does depend, because if somebody has a mental disorder and it's untreated, if it's unidentified and if it's untreated, it can affect their ability to function normally. All right, but a person who has sought out the help or has had relatives, take them in to see a doctor, and they have been properly diagnosed and given the recommended form of treatment, they can definitely live and function, just like everybody else. And there are persons who you may not even know have a mental illness because it's being managed. They're getting the help for it. They're getting the counseling, or they're taking their medication regularly. And so sometimes you may not even be able to recognize it. In most cases, when we see somebody with mental illness in the community and we're able to readily identify it, oftentimes it's the person is in relapse, for example, and they haven't, been on their medication, like we would say, or they haven't been, really adhering to the treatment regimen.
So, I mean, you are head of the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse.
Yes.
How do someone go about getting an appointment to to seek counseling or advice on mental disorders?
Well, we are a government department, so we're open during the regular hours of 8 and 4:30. We have offices in Grand Turk and in Providenciales, and we have clinicians that would visit the Family Islands on a periodic basis. All right, so persons can walk in. They can walk in and they can schedule an appointment, or they can call. We have a Facebook page. We have a website. So we're pretty visible on social media,
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
so it is simple enough to just pick up the phone and call and make an appointment, or walk in and make an appointment.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I'm aware of cases whereby persons were sent outside of the Turks and Caicos Islands due to mental. At what point does that happen? I mean, and why do we have to send persons abroad? Is it because we don't have any facilities here, or it's just it's too extreme to handle here?
The main reason is because we don't have specialized infrastructure to really help persons that have severe mental illnesses. So we have our general hospitals, right, which is where a person would initially go, right, if they have a mental health issue and they need to be hospitalized. But usually what happens when we send them abroad is because they need an extended time of treatment, so we may have them in the hospital for a few days, but if their symptoms persist, we usually would have to send them to a specialized hospital, like a psychiatric hospital. And so we don't have psychiatric hospitals here, or a psychiatric wing or anything like that.
Okay.
So that is where you'll see cases where persons are being sent overseas, to those facilities.
Okay.
There is a facility in Grand Turk on the old hospital grounds that was started. And so eventually we expect that facility would be completed one day. And so we would be able to really treat persons in country, and not have to really fly them out,
Right.
for treatment.
Okay. What do you say to persons, for example, once someone is aware that you had some sort of breakdown,
Yeah.
they call you crazy. And it's like they label you crazy for life, even though you might have been delivered or recovered. What do you say to a situation like that? People just label you as crazy
Yeah.
because of maybe just one breakdown you had, but it's possible that you could be,
Yeah.
cured.
And it's unfortunate that we throw out labels like that on people, because really and truly we should all try to avoid labels like crazy or
Yes.
insane. We should try to avoid those types of things, because the truth of the matter is any one of us can develop a mental health disorder, okay, at some point in time,
Especially based on the description you give us.
yeah. Based on the World Health Organization, 1 in 4 persons suffer with a mental illness at some point in their lifetime. So the statistics are high. And some of the most common mental illnesses you tend to see out there are things like depression and anxiety. And I think a lot of times people just focus on the severe, like psychotic disorders,
Yes,
and they
yes.
consider that mental illness. But there are so many people just like you and I who, are suffering with depression or anxiety of some form, and so what I would say is that, you have to be aware that these are common conditions, and it's no one's fault that they develop it. Just like if someone develops, cancer, we don't blame them, we don't look down on them,
That's a good point.
Yeah, so we can't look down on persons because they have a mental illness or have this negative perception about it. And I think that's one of the main things that I'm passionate about, is to see that negative perception eliminated from our society, because mental illnesses are just as common as physical ailments,
Now, I used to suffer a lot from low self-esteem for many, many years. I know you talk about depression being an example of mental illness. So persons that are suffering from low self-esteem, is that a form of mental illness, mental disorder?
In and of itself, no. There isn't like a mental disorder called low self-esteem, no. But what happens is, in certain mental disorders, you will have that manifesting. You will have a person may have issues with low self-esteem or self-hatred, feelings of inadequacy. So these are some of the symptoms of certain mental disorders. In and of itself, it's not, but we do see it occurring in certain mental disorders like depression, or persons who have thought about suicide or harming themselves. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of self-hatred there. There's a lot of self-loathing. So it is a common symptom, in a mental disorder.
Based on your experience, you've been around for a while, working in the department. What is the shortest turnaround, based on your examples? The shortest turnaround someone was able to recover from being mentally ill or mentally disordered?
That's something that is kind of difficult to answer, because a lot of these different mental illnesses, it runs a different course for some people. All right, so for some individual, they may have an episode that'll last, a few days or a few weeks. For others, they may have an episode that lasts 2 months or several months, and then it'll subside, but then it'll recur again. So it's kind of hard to put a time frame on it, because of the nature and course of the disorder. And basically, too, you have to consider how compliant that person is with their treatment regimen, if they're following the guidelines of their doctor.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on this YouTube channel. This has been very, very informative. Now, I don't know if I was able to cover everything. Obviously, it's, almost 300 disorders.
Yes.
I can't cover everything in this short time.
Yeah.
But are there any other areas that you want to, share before we end our show that we didn't cover in our interview?
I tend to just like to remind persons, that you don't have to wait until you're in a crisis, to really reach out for help. The minute you feel overwhelmed or sense that, you have a tremendous emotional burden on you, or you feel like you can't focus, or you just feel overwhelmed and it's affecting your ability to really do what you need to do in work or at school, start reaching out, start asking questions, and reach out for help, because it's there, it's available. There is a mental health department. There are trained clinicians who are in country that can help. And we need to kind of get past this stigma that's out there and get past the fear that is also out there. Because I think one of the major drawbacks to persons getting help is there's really an intense fear that their information isn't going to be kept confidential. And there is that fear in a small country like ours that the minute they walk out those doors, their information is just going to be all over the place, But I sit here today to say confidently that anyone walking into the Department of Mental Health or speaking with any one of our clinicians, they can be assured that their information is going to be kept confidential, because we're ethically bound, and we take no pleasure in sharing anybody's information. We have to keep it confidential,
All right, well, thank you very much. For those of you listening, please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And I hope that this show has been very informative for you. Mental illness is real. And don't be afraid to get help. The Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse is available. They have trained professionals who can help you. You can talk to your pastor if you wish. It's up to you. But you must seek help. Sometimes our actions also drive people to mental instability. Sometimes we treat people really mean. Sometimes we abuse people physically and verbally. That could drive them to mental disorder. So sometimes we also have to be careful what we do as well as on our actions, and that's the environmental, I suppose, aspect. But don't be afraid to reach out to get help. It's best you get help than to live with this secret of mental illness, and then eventually it escalates and it becomes very extreme. You don't want to. It can be cured, it can be treated.